Good morning. Let's see. All right. Okay, good morning. I'm Andrea with Happy Cloud Creations. And I'm jumping on. I was like trying to figure out my screen. Okay. I'm jumping on today because it is week 3 of the Prismatic Party Quilt Along. I don't know if I'm live yet. Just one second. Okay, now I'm going live on Instagram. I thought I pushed the button, but I didn't, obviously. All right. So, it's week 1 of the Prismatic Party Quilt Along. Or not, week 3. Hello, Jackie. Hello, Linda. This week, I know it's a little confusing. It's week 3, but we're making block 2. It's because week 1 we did all the cutting of the fabric, and week 2 we made block 1. So this week we are making block 3. Hello, Mother. So this week, basically, so I colored my sheet in. So last week we made our center block. I didn't go over making the sashing going around it because that is in a later step when you're putting your quilt top together. So if you were wanting to square up that last quilt block that you did last week, I recommend before squaring it up, make sure it's freshly pressed because I'll show you my last week block. So sometimes when they're not freshly pressed, these will bump up a little bit, and if you go to measure it, if you don't have like a large square ruler and you're just measuring on your cutting or on your cutting mat, sometimes it might appear like it's not big enough, but it actually is. You just need to give it a really good pressing. Sometimes people recommend starching it and then pressing it, and then you get a nice crisp block and you can measure it better. But I typically like to make all my blocks, and then when I am going to put my quilt top together, that's when I trim if needed. If you're going through and measuring all these units that you put together before you put your whole block together, it should be the correct size. If you're, you measured this and this was 4.5 by 4.5, this was 4.5 by 4.5. All the units were 4.5 by 4.5, and then you go to sew them together, your final block should be the correct size. If it's slightly smaller, your seam allowance is probably a little too big. If it is slightly bigger, your seam allowance is probably too small. So you might want to check that if your blocks are not ending up the correct size. So today we're going to go over block number 2, which are these 4. So we will be making 4 blocks. Even though the directions are kind of like going over how to make 1 block at a time, that's why you'll see in the directions, make 4 of this unit, or make such and such number of this unit, because you're making enough for 4 blocks. Because this isn't just like a block pattern where the bigger the quilt is, the more blocks you do. Basically, the bigger the quilt is, you still have the same amount of blocks, it's just those blocks get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you guys have any questions during this, please let me know. Page 7 is where you're going to find the half square triangles. So basically, we're going to want to make our half square triangles first. And then we got small ones, and then on the back, on page 8, we got our large half square triangles. So since I'm making the baby size, my half square triangles aren't quite that big. But if you are making like the king or queen, let's see what your large ones are going to end up pretty large. So like the king's large are going to end up 9.5 by 9.5. So sometimes I recommend if you do have a square ruler, see I have my rulers over here. They're hiding. I was able to get a pack of this 12.5, and it was like a 6.5 at Joann Fabrics with a 50% off coupon or 40% off coupon. It makes them a little more affordable. The Fiskar ones are a little more affordable than the other ones just because they don't have any non-stick or anything on them, non-slip. But this really helps when squaring up larger blocks or pieces. But if you don't have that, that's fine too. You can just use your 6 by 24 inch ruler. If you notice, it has a diagonal line on here, okay? So you're going to want to use the 45-degree line. But first, we're going to make the half square triangles. So you make the small ones exactly the same way you make your large ones. You basically stack right sides of fabrics together. Mine are solids, so it's kind of hard to tell which is the right side. Solids, I typically say, if both sides look the same, they're both right side of your fabric, right? So you stack them, and you're going to want to draw a line diagonal from top to bottom. And then I used a hair marker. I had always been using this Clover one. I have tile floor, so I dropped it. It chipped. You can see a little point chipped. And then I have another one that dropped and chipped down here. So recently, my husband just bought me these awesome new ones. Isn't that cool? It's a wooden one. So I use these to draw my lines. You can see it on solids very well. So it was kind of hard to see on this floral print, my line. But I like doing that because then I don't have to worry about any ink washing out of my fabric. Because if you use a pencil or just a regular pen, sometimes it might stain your fabric and you might see through to the top of your quilt, and you won't want to do that. So if you're going to use any type of pen, I would recommend going to the fabric store and getting one that says water soluble, will wash out, it's meant for fabric. So we draw our line from top to bottom, and then you're going to sew. I'll show you on the back, you can see better. Sew a 1/4 inch from that line. And what I do is I use my 1/4 inch foot that I bought. My machine didn't come with a 1/4 inch foot, so I specifically went on Amazon and looked for Janome low shank 1/4 inch foot, because that's what the Janome website said that's what I needed. And so I just lined my presser foot, or my 1/4 inch foot, along that line and sew 2 1/4 inch lines. Do the same with the large one. It was easier for me to see on this dark one. The lines don't show up as much on this floral fabric, so I sewed on this side. Basically, you do that. You can take a ruler and cut them apart with your, what's it called? Rotary cutter, but sometimes I worry about it sliding and cutting them badly. I think my scissors are on behind me. So what you would do is you just cut these in half. Maybe I'll be brave and I'll cut it. Facebook can't see, but Instagram can. So I just line it up and slice it down the center. And then I just finger press them open gently. And then I take my iron and press it. You don't want to use a lot of motion with it because you don't want this line to become wonky. You want it to be nice and straight. So whenever you're pressing anything, I just try to make sure my seams look nice and straight before I press it with the iron, and then press it with the iron. Those wooden tools are beautiful. What a great husband. Yes, isn't he awesome? Yeah, I'm really excited. They're from Modern American Vintage. I know they have a page on Facebook and on Instagram. They also, I got a seam ripper and a point turner. So they make a lot of pretty tools. Anyways, so press it, open, and then this is going to be slightly larger than you need. So that's where trimming comes into play. So I have ones that are fresh, are nice and pressed. And when I go to trim them, you're going to see a 45-degree line on all of your rulers. If it is a quilting ruler, it's going to have this 45-degree line. We have it on the small square. It's kind of nice. This isn't as cumbersome as your large 6 by 24 inch ruler, so that's why I like to use this for all my smaller pieces. But this also is going to have that 45-degree line. And you would just, when you're going to trim it, you want to make sure your seam is lined up with that 45-degree line. That way, when you go to trim it, which I'll do I just like to trim like a little bit on the first two sides. And you're going to want your, oh, I slipped. I did what you're not supposed to do. Okay, so if you don't line it up perfectly, you see this side has more than that side, right? If you can see that. The blue has more than the white, and that's not what you want. When you go to sew all your pieces together, that's going to make your points not lined up. It's going to make it look weird. I typically stand when I cut, so that's why it didn't turn out as I like. So I'm going to stand. I feel like I have more control over the ruler when I stand. There we go. So now we got that perfect point. So you're going to do that, and then you'll flip it around and you'll cut the other two sides so that you have that perfect same amount of fabric on both sides. Does that make sense? And you would do the exact same thing with your large half square triangles. So if you don't have a large enough square ruler and you're using this one for those king and queen size, the larger ones, you know, I'm not going to say go out and buy a square ruler if you can't afford that. I don't think that's right. So for the longest time, I just used my cutting mat. And I lined it up on the lines on my cutting mat and used that 45-degree line on my ruler. And I measured with my cutting mat. And I did that for years. I didn't buy my square rulers till a couple years ago. Just because I was like, well, I've got a 40% off coupon, you know. So I was like, I'm going to do it. Splurge a little, you know. But you don't have to. You can just use your main ruler. So once you have those trimmed, let's go to the pattern and see what's the next step. Wrong side of my pattern. All right, so block 2 starts on page 10. So we're going to take our large half square triangles that we made, and we're going to take a square that is exactly the same size as that half square triangle. And then we're going to, with right sides together, we're going to sew them together. And if you notice in the pattern, you're going to be making 2. One's going to be, your half square triangle is going to be angled this way. One's going to be angled that way. And then it says to make 4, because you're going to need one of each of these for each of your blocks, and you're making 4 blocks. So I notice when I'm sewing half square triangles together with other pieces, to putting the bulky piece up through your machine first makes it end up much nicer, and your seam can be a lot more even. If you start at this end, sometimes once your machine hits this bulk, it might like stretch it a little. So I noticed doing the bulky pieces first makes your piece turn out a lot better. And so then once you have those together, finger press it open and then press up to the solid piece, because there's no seam in there, so it's going to cause less bulk to press up to that solid piece. And then you're going to basically do the same thing. When I do this next strip, I pin all 3 pieces together, just so that I can run them all through the machine at the same time. I run one piece and then I butt the next piece up. It's called chain piecing, so that you're not wasting thread, you're not wasting time, and you just put them all through. And with that one, you're going to make 2 as well, one going one way, one going the other way. And then since we pressed, I guess it's not going to matter much, but this one we're going to press all the seams going upward. And it'll matter once you have your next piece to link to them when you have all your pieces done. And again, with that one, I started the bulky. And if you notice, it kind of just makes a little triangle at the top when you're sewing it. And you'll want to notice that triangle when you go to put all those units together. And again, when you're done with those units, measure them to make sure that they're correct. At the bottom of all of my things, all of my steps, it says This unit will measure baby 4.5 by 8.5, throw 5.5 by 10.5, so on and so on and so on. Because the king is gonna be 9.5 by 18.5. That's a really large unit. So that's almost like a block in itself. And so you're like finishing these units as blocks for your larger ones and making sure those are the correct size. It'll end up making all of your blocks the correct size. So we got those two units together, which are fairly simple. The next one is the diamond and rectangle. I don't know if that's the official name, but that's what I'm calling it. It's very similar to the diamond and square that we made last week, where we take our two pieces of fabric on opposite sides and we draw lines down the center of them. And then we're going to stitch right up against that line, kind of chomping into our drawn line. I used my hair marker for that. You can also use whatever tool you would like. Once you do that, if you're worried your seam wasn't like completely straight, you can just finger press this open and then press it, making sure it's lining up with the sides of your unit. Again, my scissors are over there. So then you would trim, so it's a 1/4 inch. I just eyeball it, trim it with my scissors. So I have my sewing machine behind my laptop right now, and I was sewing earlier, trying to finish these pieces. So once those are done, you press them, finger press, and press with your iron. Boom, throw that. And then we'll have a piece like this, and then we'll attach the other two pieces. Just make sure you're attaching your background fabric up top and your color, what is it? See? Down here. And do the same thing. Draw a line, and then just chomp right into that line next to it. And then again, finger press it open, matching all those corners, press it, and then you can go back and trim those off. Just don't trim all 3 layers. Just trim the back 2. Okay, so once you have that diamond in rectangle unit done, you're going to want to sew your color A to the bottom. That's the center of the petal, the center of the flower. I pinned it on the top, but a lot of times I like to flip it over and sew it so I can see the bottom of that triangle. Because when you're sewing it together, you're using a 1/4 inch seam, scant 1/4 inch seam. You'll notice all of those lines kind of go together. That's how you know, okay, my point is still going to be there, and that is actually a scant 1/4 inch seam. That's accurate. So then when you go to open it up, it's getting pins everywhere. Ooh, there's a little thread. Oh well. You open it up, you didn't lose your point, because on the back, your line went right through that dot, or even a little under that point, so you don't lose that point. And then you're going to press away from the point. It causes less bulk, I notice. So if you're pressing this one down, and you press this one up, when you go to put them together, again, measure to make sure it's the correct size. When you go put them together, those seams are gonna butt right up next to each other. They're gonna nest kind of like, just like puzzle pieces put right together, lay nice and flat, and then you can pin them all in place. I like to start nest here and pin all the way up, because up here it's kind of harder to nest seams or figure out where they're supposed to go, because this one is actually, this point ends about a 1/4 inch from that other seam on this piece, if you notice. So I like to start at a point that I can nest seams and then go from there. I guess then after that, once you pin and nest them all together, boom, you got your block. So you can see on the back with the half square triangles, when you nested those and sewed them together, those two, the seam kind of goes just right through that little point I don't know if you can see that right there. Your seam, the scant 1/4 inch seam is going to go right through that point. And then you know you're not going to lose your point on your block. Ta-da! Does anybody have questions about this block at all? And then after it's done, you can go and measure it to make sure it's the correct size and trim it up, but make sure it's all freshly pressed, nice and flat. And you'll be making 4 of these because they will go around your center medallion. So this was kind of like, this whole quilt was kind of inspired by, somebody said they wanted a medallion quilt. I don't know if it's technically a medallion quilt, but you know, you have your center block and work out from that. So that's what I did. If nobody has questions, next week I will be jumping on again at 10 a.m. to go over block. See, the weeks and the numbers confuse me too. So block 3, it'll be week 4, but block 3, which is if you already finished all your half square or all your flying geese last week. Next week's gonna go together very quickly. It's this block, and we're gonna be making 4 of those, which I finished all my flying geese last week, and this week I'm hoping to finish all my half square triangles. Even though we only need a few for these blocks, I want to just get them out of the way for the future blocks, and get them done. Any questions? Did you knit your sweater? It's beautiful. Yes, I did. Thank you. My kids helped me dye the yarn with food coloring. You can dye yarn with food coloring if it's wool, food coloring, vinegar or citric acid, and heat. So we dyed it and I knitted it. That's a little hobby. I think they're on midwinter break this week, so they get the whole week off. So we might dye some yarn later this week if there's time, because they have a bunch of yarn to dye. If there's no questions, I'm trying to think. 4 blocks next week, 10 a.m. If there's any questions, you can always email me at Andrea at happycloudcreations.com, or you can email me at happycloudcreations@gmail.com. So I have 2 emails. So if you get one from a Gmail account or like, is that her legit email? It is. That was my original one. It's just when I started a different newsletter company, I had to get one from my website. So I have 2 emails. And also, you can always post questions in the group. Oh, I did have one thing. I almost forgot. So, where is it? Okay. Page 10. Step 2. If you are making a king size quilt. I knew there was something else. Right here where it says color E, 8 of 5 by 5.5. That's incorrect. So it should say just 5 by 5 inch squares. So if you have a paper printed one or you already printed yours out, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little white out on that 1/2 inch and take that away. If you see right there, that's incorrect. If you have a digital one and you want me to send you a new digital copy, you need to email me and tell me you'd like a new digital copy, because too many people have purchased it and I can't just Gmail won't let me send out that many emails at a time for a new digital copy. So if you want a new digital copy, it's just affecting the king size and it's telling you it's a 1/2 size too big. So it should be 8 5 by 5 inch. And also I have a pattern corrections update page on my website. So if you're ever wondering, is there any updates to this pattern or corrections to this pattern, you can go to my website, Happy Cloud Creations, and there's a specific page for those. So there's a few on the Joyful Meadows. There's one on the Frame It. And then I think there's one on the Kabayam. There's one correction. So I put those after the pattern's released and there's a correction. Typically after that correction has been made, all digital patterns purchased after that are all correct. So if there's no other questions, I will let you guys get busy sewing, get your blocks done if you haven't done so yet. I will finish mine up today maybe after I do my chores. And I will talk to you guys next week at 10 a.m. Have a wonderful day. Let's see. I always forget how to stop my lives. Goodbye.